I always used to fall in love with men who would break my heart. And this happened so many times that after a while, I really started to wonder, like, was the universe trying to teach me something? Was this a lesson I was supposed to learn? Or maybe the universe is just straight up out to get me. This so wasn't true, but after it happening so many times, it really made me wonder, what was going on here? Why every time I really liked someone and fell in love, they would end up breaking my heart? Well, I wasn't as powerless as I thought I was. I eventually realized that I was choosing certain types of men who were likely to break my heart. I used to feel like relationships just happened. Like I just went with the flow and somehow ended up in these relationships with people who would hurt me. Let me know if you have felt like this in the past. Like I was just being carried along by love and I had no say in it. But what I realized is there were very specific points in that experience of getting into a relationship where I could have made very different choices. There were times when I could have said no to somebody, or I could have stopped talking to them here, and that would have made the outcomes that I was experiencing in relationships totally different. What also helped me to break out of this cycle of people breaking my heart was to realize why, specifically, I was feeling like I didn't have any control. Why I felt like I was just being passively pulled into these relationships. Because if you've been in this place where you've been with people who break your heart or who are abusive, you know that's what it feels like. It feels like you're just being drawn in and you're kind of like powerless to whatever's going on, to whatever this pull is, this energy. It feels like you have no control over it, but you totally do. When you can understand what got you into those relationships, then you can understand how to not get into them. So let's get into it. Today, I'm going to be talking about why we fall for men who break our hearts and, most importantly, how to not do that anymore. How to break that cycle, how to stop getting into relationships that are painful, abusive, or just plain old hurt. So there's three main reasons that I see in myself and in my clients for why we get into these relationships, why we keep falling for men who break our hearts. And the first one is familiarity. Now, what do I mean by this? I'm talking about if we've had a childhood experience where a caregiver has broken our hearts. Maybe they were unavailable, maybe they were abusive, maybe they were just distant or cold. That becomes our unconscious template for what relationships are supposed to look like. And we have no idea this is happening, it's all underneath the surface, but when we are familiar, let's say, for example, with distance from the opposite sex, from a male, from a parent, then that's what we are unconsciously drawn to when we're adults. Because that's what we knew. It feels familiar, it feels like home, it feels right. And this isn't your fault, you guys. If you're hearing this and going like, if you're blaming yourself, no, don't do it. This isn't your fault. This is actually what our brains are wired to do. It's a survival mechanism. Our brains are wired to be drawn towards what's familiar, what's in our comfort zone. Because according to that primitive brain of ours, which all of us have, what hasn't killed us so far is coded as safe. So your brain understands that, okay, yeah, this emotional unavailability that I experienced or this person being cold in my past, yeah, it was painful as heck, but I'm still here. I'm still alive, so it must mean it's safe. And so you're actually drawn towards that. It's normal. So if you had some difficult experiences when you were a child, if you had a caregiver that again was distant, that's that unconscious pull. You're gonna feel pulled towards someone. We assign all these mystical meanings toward it, like, oh, it's just the energy. A lot of people say, well, this is the law of attraction working. Nah, this is just that unconscious pull towards someone who feels very familiar and known to you. Again, it's that feeling like you're just being drawn into something and you go, oh, I don't know, this just happened. You probably know what that feels like. That's what this is. Now, you might have noticed that if you've had these painful relationships in the past, that maybe they started out feeling very electric. Like maybe there was a lot of chemistry right away. Maybe this person felt like home to you. Maybe they felt like this was just right. Like this was the one, this was the person. That's really common in these types of relationship dynamics where the person ends up breaking your heart because of what was familiar to us in our past. Now, back to the example of having, let's say, a caregiver who was cold or distant. When someone cold or distant approaches you, it feels normal. It's not ideal, it's not what you want, but deep down, you know what this looks like. You are familiar with this, it feels like home, it feels safe to a certain degree, and so you go with it. In contrast, someone who shows up in your life who isn't cold, who's really warm, who's very affectionate, who's available, that can feel weird. It can feel uncomfortable. It can feel like, I don't know what to do with this. Usually, what this ends up looking like on a conscious level is, I'm just not feeling it with this person. They don't do it for me. They're just a friend. I'm not attracted to this person. That's how it looks. So if we have a lot of subconscious baggage and wounds from our past, all this stuff from childhood that maybe we've never looked at, we've never processed or talked about, that's when we unconsciously get pulled into these types of situations where men keep breaking your heart. So the next reason I see for why we end up in relationships with men who break our hearts is we are attracted to the highly attractive partners. Duh, right? So what am I talking about here? Very often, some, not all, but some of the really attractive partners that are out there are actually also narcissistic. Narcissistic people, most of them, again, not all, but most of them can be extremely attractive and extremely charming. Now, again, not all narcissism manifests like this, but a lot of them do fit this mold. They are often very physically attractive. They may have a lot of power, which in turn usually means they also have a lot of wealth, they have a lot of money. And these are characteristics that a lot of us women, we're just drawn to. We really like that. And there's also a lot of love bombing that happens in these types of relationships, which can be so flattering. It can feel so good. It's hard not to be drawn into these types of relationships. But inevitably, if you're with someone narcissistic, they are going to break your heart. The love bombing never lasts. Eventually, the mask that they wear drops, and you're left with a painful relationship. Again, narcissistic people can be really attractive. They can have a lot of the qualities that we look for on paper, but they make terrible relationship partners, and they will inevitably be abusive and just hurt you. Now, the last reason I see for why we get into relationships with men who break our hearts is that we actually deep down don't feel worthy or deserving of real love, a healthy relationship. There's this weird thing that our mind does where if deep down we don't believe that we're worthy of love, we don't want to be proven wrong. And so we will actually go for the types of people who make us feel that way, who make us feel like we're not worthy or we don't deserve it. Because again, it's part of our comfort zone. It's familiar. And as painful as that comfort zone might be, it still feels safe and we don't want to break out of that. The reason why this happens is because breaking out of that, let's say if we have the belief that we don't deserve love or that we're not good enough, if we were to then, with that belief, make a move to be with someone who did feel like we were good enough, holy cow, we would be confronted with so much emotion. It would be very uncomfortable. And you would have this like cognitive dissonance, like, wait, this doesn't even make sense. I just can't do it. Like, I can't be with this person. It feels bad. And I know this sounds crazy, but if we haven't addressed that core belief that we're not good enough, it's actually far more uncomfortable to be with someone who does think that we're good enough. Again, it feels so weird. It feels off. It doesn't make sense to our minds. And so we don't do it. We just avoid it. Again, we go for the people who are cold or the people who make us feel like, yeah, you don't deserve this love. All right, so now that we know how we get into those relationships, now I'm going to talk about how do we stop doing this? How do we not fall for the men who will break our heart? The first thing is to understand your weaknesses. What do I mean by weaknesses? I want you to be like a detective. I want you to go back over your relationships from the past and understand what got you, like what hooked you. What are the qualities that you were drawn to in this partner that made you overlook the red flags? Because you guys, if you're honest with yourselves, there are almost always red flags, and we're either just kind of like oblivious to them, or we're seeing them and being like, nah, that's not important. I love this person. It doesn't matter. You have to understand your patterns and what you've been drawn to in the past. For me, when I did this little journey, which was not very pleasant. It was not fun to do this. But when I did this journey, I realized, crap. My pattern is to be drawn towards men who were more aloof. Like they had this just very laid back, cool, and I'm putting that in quotes because I don't think it's cool anymore, but they had this cool vibe about them. That's what used to get me. I was drawn to men who seemed a little bit mysterious. Like they held themselves back. They didn't give it all away. They weren't very open. In other words, men who were emotionally unavailable. But I did not see it like that. I was like, oh, this is just my type. I just like a more quiet guy. So you got to go back and do this work. And I highly recommend talking with a mentor about the stuff that comes to you. Talk with a mentor about what the dynamics were like for you growing up, what the experience was like in your family, what relationships were like. Because you have to know where you're coming from if you want things to be different in the future. If we're just dating blindly, like if we haven't looked at our subconscious stuff, if we have not looked at our past and we have no idea what we're doing, we're going to keep ending up in these relationships. It takes a very deliberate, conscious effort to look at the past, look what happened, look what went wrong, and decide to do something different. And so for this reason, I actually recommend having an accountability partner, a mentor, a friend, family member, someone you can talk to about what's going on for you when you go on these dates. Like what's actually happening? What is this person like? And how are they making you feel? We want somebody who we can check in with, because if we have, as you know, strong feelings towards someone, we're likely to overlook the stuff that we should be paying attention to, all of those red flags. So have somebody that you can check in with and talk about your dates with. And so they can help you to stay accountable, to not, again, going for that cool, distant, aloof guy, because that's just your type and that's just what gets your body all excited. No, have somebody to help you, like, snap you out of it. Lindsay, stop. Yep, stop. You're doing that same thing. You're doing that thing again. Remember, we're going for something different here. And then you're like, oh yeah. Thank you. The next step here is kind of in line with what I just talked about. Get help. You guys, do not try to break out of this cycle by yourself. I think it's pretty much impossible because, like I say all the time, if we would have been able to do this on our own before, we would have. It's so hard for us to see all of our blind spots. I couldn't do this without mentors because they are literally blind spots. There are spots, areas where I just can't see what I'm doing because it's what I've been doing my whole life. Like, for example, if we are empathetic, we may have a pattern of justifying certain behaviors. And what it takes is someone from outside of our brain, of our little bubble, to say, hey, wait a minute, no, don't justify this. You don't need to justify this. This isn't okay. That's what it takes. If we're trying to do it without support, we even may have that realization of like, oh yeah, actually this doesn't feel so good. But then very often we'll second guess ourselves. We'll talk ourselves out of it. Let me know if you've done this too in the past. Like, oh yeah, maybe that is a thing, but I don't know, like maybe I should just let that go. And you go back and forth with yourself. That's what a mentor can help you break out of. They can help you get that clarity for, hey, yeah, this is a red flag. Totally don't ignore that. Or, no, you know what? That's okay. That's a normal part of dating and relationships. You can work through this. When we have someone who we can talk to about our dating experiences, it's like night and day. One of the most important steps here is to heal. Do your healing work. What do I mean by healing work? All that stuff from the past that maybe you just took a look at really quickly and we're like, that is a mess. I don't want to look at that. That's where you actually need to go. And what does healing really mean? It means letting go of the past. But when I say this, I have to put out like a full disclaimer here. What does this actually mean? Letting go of the past does not mean you just ignore it, you just pretend that it didn't happen. No, it actually means you make peace with what happened in the past. What this also really means is integration. It means processing the emotions that you went through, that you weren't able to process in the moment. This means feeling the emotions so you can release them. Unfortunately, there's really no ultimate shortcut to healing. It just involves feeling your feelings. It's as simple as that. But you can move it along a little bit, and this is the work that I do in my Living Free Finding Love program. If you're interested in working with me, you can click on the link in the description. I always leave the link there to work with me. And what is most important about this healing process is to get in there and do the work on the subconscious level. A lot of therapists aren't addressing this, and that's why some people go to therapy and they feel like, I'm not really getting any better. Well, it's probably because your therapist is not addressing the subconscious. And I talk about this a lot. This is what I specialize in, subconscious work. The subconscious, again, it's that part of us that is drawn to these types of relationships because of the pain that's there from our past. So once we release that pain, once we move through those emotions, then we're actually not drawn to those types of people anymore. Or if we are, it's just a little bit, and we know so much about ourselves that we say, there's that old pattern. I'm not doing that anymore. If we want to choose better partners for ourselves, this is where we need to do the work at the subconscious level. The last step here to stop picking people who break our hearts is to learn what a healthy relationship looks like. This is so important because for so many of us, we haven't actually had the experience of having a healthy relationship. We don't know what it looks like. This is where a mentor comes in really handy. They can help you to figure out what a healthy relationship looks like. And you can also do research on your own. You can read books, you can watch videos, you can take courses. There's a lot of resources out there to help you to understand what it looks like specifically to have a healthy relationship, and what are the characteristics that you want to look for in a partner to make sure that that relationship is healthy. This is also the mentoring that I offer in my work. So again, if you want to learn more about that, click on the link in the description here. So we need to learn what a healthy relationship looks like, and then we need to start practicing those behaviors ourselves. Because healthy partners want other healthy partners. And once we start practicing these behaviors ourselves, like having healthy communication, resolving conflict in a healthy way, then we can spot it in other people. When we're doing it and someone else isn't, it's very clear. You can't miss that red flag anymore. It's right in front of your face. We'll actually start resonating more with healthy people, with healthy behavior, because we're now embodying it ourselves. We're becoming more healthy ourselves. And that's really what changes this dynamic. We got to do the work and we got to walk it like we talk it. So how do you know if you're really ready to date after you've been in a toxic or a bad relationship? Click on this video here and click here to subscribe. I come out with new videos every week for breaking the cycle of bad relationships and finding real love.